The three strolled along for a few blocks. It was a cloudy, cool morning in late June of 1951. This was the third day of a 6-week European vacation that Louis and his uncle were taking. Originally, they had planned for Uncle Jonathan's neighbor and best friend, Mrs. Florence Zimmerman, to join them, together with Louis's friend Rose Rita Pottinger. Then Rose Rita had broken her ankle. She could not go on the trip because she would have to wear a cast for about 6 weeks. Mrs. Zimmerman had considerately decided to stay home in New Zebedee, Michigan, to keep Rose Rita company. Though Louis missed both Mrs. Zimmerman and Rose Rita, he had to admit that even without them the trip had been, well, maybe the best word was exciting. Jonathan and Louis had traveled by bus and train from New Zebedee to New York. From there they had flown in an airliner to London. Louis had fretted the whole way. What if one of the airplane's engines stopped working halfway across the Atlantic? What if fog covered the airport when they arrived and the pilot crashed the plane into the ground? What if the crazy British traffic, which all moved on the wrong side of the street, got them into a dreadful automobile accident? Of course, none of these awful events had happened, but Louis was a worrywart and could not help dreaming up possible disasters. At least he always got a pleasant feeling of relief when his worst fears failed to come true. On Monday, Louis and his uncle had arrived safe and sound at their London hotel. They had spent one day resting, and today they were out to see the sights. "Now," said Constable Dwiggins suddenly as he came to a halt at a street corner, "here we are on Baker Street. Look around, Louis, and see what you can observe. I've no doubt you know Holmes's methods." Louis did as he suggested. On both sides of the street stood rows of 3-story buildings, stone-fronted and respectable. At first, nothing appeared unusual about any of them. Then Louis's eyes narrowed. "It must be that one," he said. He pointed to the second floor of an apartment building on his side of the street, nestled between the offices of a dairy and a driving school. "Wonderful, Mr. Holmes," the policeman said with a warm chuckle. "My thoughts exactly. You see the reason, of course." Louis thought carefully. "I can see at least 3 different reasons," he replied at last. "Bravo!" Uncle Jonathan laughed. "Well, I must be about as dense as Dr. Watson. I don't see anything about this building that makes it any different from the others. If it isn't too much trouble, would you please tell me what I'm missing?" With a broad smile, Constable Dwiggins nodded to Louis and asked, "Would you care to enlighten the gentleman, Mr. Holmes?" Louis put his hands behind his back, the way Sherlock Holmes often did in the stories when he began to explain his deductions. "First," he said, "that apartment house faces east. In The Adventure of the Dancing Men, Holmes held a paper up so the sunlight fell upon it, and that was in the morning. That means the windows of Holmes's flat had to look out to the east." "First rate," said Dwiggins. "Go on." A small but noisy truck rumbled by, giving Louis a chance to think about his next point. When the clamor died down, Louis said, "You will notice the front door of this building has a semicircular fan light over it. So did the door of 221B. Watson mentions that detail in The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle." Jonathan shook his head, making his beard waggle. "How on earth do you remember all that?" he asked. "I've read all of Conan Doyle's stories myself, but— Oh, well, what is the third reason, my dear fellow?" Louis turned and pointed across the street. "In The Adventure of the Empty House, Watson says an empty building was directly across Baker Street from 221B. This is the only house that has another one directly opposite it. The others are sort of off-center." "Right you are," said Dwiggins. "Good work, Mr. Holmes." "Have I missed anything?" asked Louis, unable to keep from grinning broadly. Constable Dwiggins returned his grin. "Oh, 1 or 2 minor items, but I can't fault you for them. For instance, I have learned that this is the only house in this part of Baker Street that has a backyard where the famous plane tree could grow. And I happen to know that the stairway has exactly 17 steps leading up to the first floor. Sorry, you Yanks call that the second floor, I believe. Now, it's true that the flat does not sport a bow window. However, Colonel Moran must have smashed the original window when he fired his air gun through it. Either that or the German bombs shattered it during the war. Either way, the present owners must have replaced the broken bow window with a regular window." Jonathan raised his hands in surrender. "I give up," he said. "Take me away. Plane trees and bow windows and 7